Awesome. Well, good morning to all of you. It's really good to be with you on this Sunday, the Lord's Day. If you are new or visiting, maybe it's your first time here or second or third time, I want to especially welcome you and say that we're glad that you're here. Hope you enjoy worshiping our God along with us. My name's Duane. I'm one of the pastors here under our head pastor, Jesus, and I'm the preaching pastor here. And excited for this morning because today, this Sunday, we are finally back in the book of Genesis. We started studying the book of Genesis this last September, but we've been on hiatus from the book because beginning with December for the month of Advent, we went through a special sermon series for that time, and then we did a little mini-series really to kind of set the course for who we are, where we're going for the year, and so we did 4 resolved sermons: resolve to reflect, resolve to pray, resolve to lead, and resolve to advance. And so that brings us now to this Sunday where it's been 8 weeks, if you can believe it, since we've been in Genesis. So I'll kind of catch you up on what's happened so far, what we've seen in the book of Genesis up to this point as a church as we've been working through the book. We saw that God created everything, the heavens and the earth and everything in it, including us as human beings. We saw the fall where Adam and Eve, our first parents, sinned in the Garden of Eden, and then we just saw effects of that unraveling and reverberating throughout God's creation. And that's really where we ended up through chapter 11 and just seeing the effects of the fall playing out as people turn to false gods and false gospels. Where that brings us this morning is into a shift in the book of Genesis that takes place really beginning at chapter 12, kind of at the end of 11, where the focus then turns to a new story, recreation. See creation and the fall and the effects of the fall, beginning in Genesis 12. We see God doing a new work, beginning with a man named Abram, who then later becomes Abraham, the well-known Bible figure. So I kind of set up the sermon just for a second. We've got a large amount of text, Genesis 11, verse 27 through 15:1. Really only a few verses from chapter 11 and one from 15, so we're covering just 3 chapters, but it is 3 pages, and it really does kind of all go together because it's the story of Abe's life before God makes this special covenant with him, which we'll study in depth next week. But he is really this man who was just lost, whom God comes and finds. He is lost and found. And so I titled my sermon this morning, "The Ones Who Are Lost and Then Found." And my prayer for you and for all of us is that we would be, as we sung this morning, amazed at God's grace, that we were lost and he came and found us. So with that, let me go ahead and read the text. I'll declare it as God's word, and we'll thank him for it all together by saying thanks be to God, and then I'll pray over our time in it. So this is beginning in Genesis chapter 11, verse 27. Now these are the generations of Terah. Terah fathered Abram, Haran, and Haran fathered Lot. Haran died in the presence of his father Terah in the land of his kindred in Ur of the Chaldeans. And Abram and Nahor took wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah and Iscah. Now Sarai was barren, she had no child. Terah took Abram his son, and Lot the son of Haran his grandson, and Sarai his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife, and they went forth together from Ur of the Chaldeans to go into the land of Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. The days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country, and from your kindred, and your father's house, to the land that I will show you, and I will make you a great nation. And I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." So Abram went, as the Lord told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran, and Abram took Sarai his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all their possessions that they had gathered, and the people that they had acquired in Haran, and they set out to go to the land of Canaan. When they came to the land of Canaan, Abram passed through the land to the place at Shechem, to the oak of Moreh. And at the time the Canaanites were in the land. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." So he built there an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. From there he moved to the hill country on the east of Bethel and pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there he built an altar to the Lord and called upon the name of the Lord. And Abram journeyed on, still going toward the Negev. Now there was a famine in the land, so Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land. When he was about to enter Egypt, he said to Sarai his wife, I know that you are beautiful in appearance, and when the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife. Then they will kill me, but they'll let you live. Say you are my sister, that it may go well with me because of you, and that my life may be spared for your sake. When Abram entered Egypt, the Egyptians saw that the woman was very beautiful. And when the princes of Pharaoh saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh. And the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. And for her sake, he dealt well with Abram. And he had sheep, oxen, male donkeys, male servants, female donkeys, and camels. But the Lord afflicted Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. So Pharaoh called to Abram and said, what is this you have done to me? Why did you not tell me she was your wife? Why did you say she's my sister so that I took her for my wife? Now then, here is your wife. Take her and go. And Pharaoh gave men orders concerning him, and they sent him away with his wife and all that he had. So Abram went up from Egypt, he and his wife and all that he had, and Lot with him, into the Negev. Now Abram was very rich in livestock and silver and in gold. And he journeyed on from the Negev as far as Bethel to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, to the place where he had made an altar at the first. And there Abram called upon the name of the Lord, and Lot went with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents, so the land could not support both of them dwelling together. For their possessions were so great that they could not dwell together, and there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. At that time the Canaanites and the Perizzites were dwelling in the land. Then Abram said to Lot, let there be no strife between you and me, and between your herdsmen and my herdsmen, for we are kinsmen. Is not the whole land before you? Separate yourself from me. If you take the left hand, then I'll go to the right, and if you take the right hand, then I will go to the left. And Lot lifted up his eyes. He saw the Jordan Valley was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt in the direction of Zoar. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself all the Jordan Valley, and Lot journeyed east. Thus they separated from each other. Abram settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled among the cities of the valley and moved his tent as far as Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were wicked, great sinners against the Lord. The Lord said to Abram, after Lot had separated from him, lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward and southward and eastward and westward. For all the land that you see I will give to you, to your offspring forever. I will make your offspring as the dust of the earth, so that if one could count the dust of the earth, your offspring can also be counted. Arise, walk through the length and the breadth of the land, for I will give it to you. So Abram moved his tent and came and settled by the oaks of Mamre, which are at Hebron, and there he built an altar to the Lord. In the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, Shedor-la-omer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of Goim, these kings made war with Bera, king of Sodom, Bersha, king of Gomorrah, Shinab, the king of Admah, Shemeber, king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, which is Zoar, and all these joined forces in the valley of Siddim, that is the Salt Sea. 12 years they had served Shedor-la-omer, but in the 13th year they rebelled. In the 14th year of Shedor-la-omer, and the kings were with them, came and defeated Rephaim and Ashtaroth, Karnaim, and Zuzim, and Ham, Amim, and Shevek, Irathaim, and Horizites in the hill country of Seir, as far as El Paran on the border of the wilderness. Then they turned back and came to En Mishpat, that is Kadesh, and defeated all the country of the Amalekites, and also of the Amorites who were dwelling in Hazazon Tamar. Then the king of Sodom, the king of Gomorrah, the king of Admah, the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that is Zoar, went out, and they joined battle in the valley of Siddim with Shedor-la-omer, king of Elam, Tidal, king of Goim, Amraphel, king of Shinar, and Arioch, king of Elasar, 4 kings against 5. Now the valley of Siddim was full of bitumen pits, and the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled. Some fell into them, and the rest fled to the hill country. So the enemy took all the possessions of Sodom and Gomorrah and all the provisions and went their way. They also took Lot, the son of Abram's brother, who was dwelling in Sodom, and his possessions, and went their way. The one who had escaped came and told Abram the Hebrew, who was living by the oaks of Mamre, the Amorite, brother Eshcol, and of Aner. They were allies of Abram. When Abram heard that his kinsmen had been taken captive, he led forth his trained men born in his house, 318 of them, and went in pursuit as far as Dan. And he divided his forces against them by night, he and his servants, and defeated them, and pursued them to Hobah, north of Damascus. Then he brought back all the possessions, and also brought back his kinsman Lot with his possessions, and the women and the people. After his return from the defeat of Shedor-la-omer and the kings who were with him, the king of Sodom went out to meet him at the valley of Sheva, that is the king's valley. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High, and he blessed him and said, "Blessed be Abram by God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand." And Abram gave him a tenth of everything. And the king Sodom said to Abram, "Give me the persons, but take the goods for yourself." But Abram said to the king of Sodom, "I have lifted my hand to the Lord, God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, that I would not take a thread or a sandal strap or anything that is yours, lest you should say, 'I have made Abram rich.' I will take nothing but what the young men have eaten, and let the share of the men who went with me. Let Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre take their share." After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. "Fear not, Abram, I am your shield. Your reward shall be very great." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Let's pray. God, thank you for your word, this book, the Bible that you've given us. Thank you for the story of Abraham. And through it, I pray that we would see who you are, the greatness and the goodness which you have given to us by the grace of the gospel. And I pray these things in the Lord of the gospel, Jesus Christ, in his name. Amen. All right. So I kind of have a problem, a rock and roll problem, to be quite honest. And that is that every time that I come to the Bible and I read the Bible, I almost always, rock and roll lyrics start coming to my mind. It's some reason, it's just the way that God's made me and wired me. I think in rock and roll. So with this story and reading about this journey of Abram, who then becomes Abraham, I couldn't stop or help myself but thinking about the band Journey. Uh, you know, just a small town girl living in a lonely world, took the midnight train going anywhere. You guys know the song, right? Come on. You know, there's the city boy born and raised in South Detroit who gets on the midnight train going anywhere. I think there's a reason why most of us know that song, probably from bad karaoke nights. But it resonates with people, and there's something why I think likewise the story of Abram resonates with us. I mean, well, first of all, with the song Journey, for the band Journey, how can you not like 80s glam rock? It's just, if you don't, there's something wrong with you. But there is something to the content of this song. You know, there's this echo of the love story in it, but there's also something more. It tends to almost capture this universal human experience where everyone finds themselves at some point in their life where they're searching. You're searching and trying to figure out who you are and where you're going, and you don't quite know what's what. And there's this need and this desire to find one's self. But when you look out in the great big world, what you see and what you feel is lost. You're on a midnight train going anywhere, nowhere, who knows where. And the story of Abraham that we're looking at today is very similar. It's the story of a man who was lost until God comes to him, and which sets his life off on this big adventure full of all kinds of twists and turns. Now, if you don't know who Journey is and you don't like rock and roll, maybe think more like Lord of the Rings. You know, Gandalf shows up at Bilbo Baggins' house, and it sets off this course of worldwide events that take effect for many generations that follow, right? It's the story of Abram, the man who, like us, was once lost and then found. So let's jump in and get into our first point for today. I've just got 3 points. God comes to us, God sticks with us, and God fights for us. And I intentionally put together an outline that emphasizes God's role in the story of Abram. Because what too often and too easily happens for many of us when we read the Bible, and especially the stories that occur in the Old Testament, is you'll read it and then you'll automatically jump to the thinking that the story is all about whoever the person is that you're reading about, namely in this case Abram, and that its point and purpose is so that you'll either mimic his good behavior or not mimic his bad behavior. And what's dangerous about that way of thinking and reading the Bible and treating the Bible is that it totally misses the central character of the story, the central hero, really, of the entire Bible, the one that every single story is primarily meant to be written about. And that's God. It's God. The story of Abram is the story of God doing something wonderful, and something he's still doing today. So first point, God comes to us in our place of lostness. Now, I included that last little section at the end of chapter 11 because it serves an important purpose. There's a couple key things there. It tells us who and where Abram came from. It tells us about his family and the place he was born and raised. Every one of us here today has a family that you have come from and a place that you grew up in, even if it was multiple places. And who our family is and where we have come from has a huge influence on who we are and who we become. Say again, who our family is and where we grew up has a huge influence on who we are and who we become as people. Now, these two influences are big, and there's a couple details in this little section that are important for us. Why it was such a big deal that God came to Abram. First, notice not once but twice it says that he is from Ur of the Chaldeans. Ur of the Chaldeans. Now, this is the first mention of the Chaldeans in Scripture, who then later are the Babylonians. But the Chaldeans get brought up by name like something like another 76 times. And every time they get brought up, it's not good. They're always a group of people who don't love and worship God, and they actually end up attacking God's people a number of times. So Abram is a Chaldean, and he's not just a Chaldean, but he's a Chaldean from Ur, the city of Ur. Now, any person living during the time when this was originally written would automatically know about Ur. It was one of the great cities of the ancient world. It was well known and much acclaimed, like some of our cities here in California. You've got like San Francisco, LA, San Diego, and when you think of these cities, there's certain things that come to mind, right? If you think of San Francisco, what do you think of? The Golden Gate Bridge, or maybe Fisherman's Wharf, or Alcatraz. If you think of LA, you think of maybe Hollywood movies, lots of freeways and traffic and smog. If you think of San Diego, you think of beaches and the sun and awesomeness. So you get this thing, we know associations with cities. Now, when people thought of Ur, the thing that would immediately come to their mind was its ziggurat. Now, it's been a while, I know, a couple months since we've been in Genesis, but the last time we were in it together, we talked about ziggurats, the ziggurat at Babel. Basically, ziggurats, they were kind of like pyramids, only they weren't hollow inside. And basically, they were constructed in the worship of whatever the people or the city's god was. And they would have a stairway that would go all the way up. And there would be a little room with a bed and a little altar. They would have sacrifices to the gods. And the idea was that the gods would then, because they would be able to come down onto the ziggurat. Okay? Kind of interestingly, the ziggurat that was built in Ur, and they've done excavations, you can go look up at pictures of that, was to a god named Nana. Nana was the moon god, and just so happens that Nana is supposedly the son of Enlil, who in the ancient Mesopotamian stories is supposedly the one that caused the flood during Noah's time. Now, I think we got an artist rendering of the ancient city of Ur based on the archaeological excavations there. It's now this city in Iraq. But what I want us to recognize here with this is that this isn't the first time that we've encountered the worship of other gods or false gods in the book of Genesis. Not the first time we've encountered ziggurats. When we talked about the ziggurat in Babel, God destroyed the whole work, dismantled, disrupted the process by confusing the languages because the people of Babel wanted to make a great name for themselves. Okay? Now, God's action in Babel since then, it's 9 generations ago at this point in the story. 9 generations go by, something like 260 some years. And all during that time, nobody hears from God. There's no record of him saying or doing anything. There's no account of him acting in any specific way in the affairs of men and women. So, you got to get the picture here. Abe, he's all into Nana, the moon god. He's from Ur. That's what people in Ur are there for. He's a Chaldean in Ur. He's just this pagan, false god worshiping nobody. If any doubt about it, you can pick up this thing in the end of chapter 11 where it says he's with his family. They're this tight-knit group of people. They're kind of moving all as one mass together. And here's what Joshua chapter 24, another book in the Bible, if you're new to the Bible, book of Joshua, chapter 24, verse 2 says about Abram in this time. It says, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, long ago your fathers lived beyond the Euphrates, Terah, the father of Abraham and Nahor, and they served other gods." So Scripture is very clear that Abram, when God comes to him, he's serving other gods. He doesn't know God. He's not into the God of the Bible. So when God comes to Abram, he's a bad dude. I mean, if you don't believe in and worship and love God, then you're a bad guy and God doesn't like you. So this is surprising that God comes to Abram. Now, on top of it, there's another textual clue that tells us a little bit more about really who Abram is before God comes to him. It's in verse 30 of chapter 11. It says, "Now Sarai was barren. She had no child." That's a really mean verse. Uh, it's kind of interjected into this paragraph where there's this list of names and places, but so it kind of sticks out. There's this special attention that's given to it. I mean, there's Abram and the place and the family he was from, and then they're like, oh, and you got to hear this about Abram. His wife was barren, no child. It doesn't even just, I mean, everybody would know. Everybody knows what barren is, but then it make it extra explicit, extra embarrassing. She was with no child. Barren with no child. See, it's a mean verse. Now, what you got to understand, because we live in a really, really screwed up time in our day and age. It's really backward and twisted. We live in this day when people think like having children is an option that you should, either choose to either have children or not have children. When that's one of the reasons why God made us, so that we would have children. And then on top of that, if you somehow get pregnant, you can decide to kill that baby, and that's legal. I mean, we live in a crazy time, so make no mistake. Like, abortion is murder and it's sin. We're very backwards on this in the U.S. But for Abram, thinking about this story, to not be able to have a child, I mean, it was one of the biggest disgraces, biggest disappointments a woman could ever experience in the ancient world. If you're barren, you're basically like a failure in life. You're not really worth anything. You can't have children. And it's not just tough for Sarai, but it's also for Abram. Her barrenness is a direct reflection upon Abram. Across the board, no matter what deity you worship, no matter what place that you lived or came from in the ancient world, being barren was a sign of being cursed. I mean, you are rejected by the gods. And not only that, people in society, they would treat you differently if you were barren. You're kind of an outcast because of it. So Abram here, he's really at the low of a low. I mean, he picked a sorry excuse for a wife. He worships the moon. He's almost 80 years old. And he hasn't really done anything with his life. And then God comes to him. God comes to him. Seemingly out of nowhere, God shows up and he speaks with him. So, God created everything, the world and everything in it. Creates Adam and Eve. They rebel against him. Ever since, the effects of the fall, of sin and the fall, are reverberating throughout multiple generations, causing all kinds of heartache in people's lives and lands, no matter where they go. I mean, the situation since then truly has been, as Romans 3:11 states, that none is righteous, no, not one. No one understands. No one seeks God. Since the fall. That's the way things are. So beginning with Abram, God does something new. His last big work is creation. Now with Abram, he starts his next big work, recreation. Recreation. He redeems him and he makes Abram into something new and better. And this is a major shifting point in the story in the book of Genesis. It's big. So check out what God says to Abram with me in verses 1-3 of Genesis 12. Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land I will show you, and I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." But God says, I mean, let's be honest and recognize what he says here. It's a big ask, and the promise is pretty inconceivable. I mean, the ask, leave your home, leave your family, I mean, that's difficult just in and of themselves. Inherent within the families, leave your family gods. So no more moon god Nana anymore. Now you're going to follow me and I'm going to be your God instead. I'm not going to tell you where you're going to go. I might tell you later, but just follow me and do what I say. Big ask, right? Big promise. You'll be a nation. Your name will be great. Remember, Babel wanted a great name for themselves. God makes great. You will be a blessing to everyone on earth. This is huge. I mean, old nobody pagan Abe is going to become a nation with worldwide eternal renown, and he will be a conduit of blessing for all people. I mean, this is huge. You got to imagine that. I mean, God comes to you, says all the world is going to know you, and what he does with you is going to affect all the course of history. It's crazy. Now, there's something here I want us to notice. I want us to notice what's missing in God's words to Abram. What's missing is there is no condition here. There's no conditional statement. You know what I mean by that? It doesn't say, "Oh, hey, Abe, hi, I'm the real God, and here's what I want to do. If you do this, if you leave, then I will do this for you." It's not there. There's no if-then clause, no conditional statement. Instead, what we have is a command: go. And then God just says what he's going to do. He just says what's going to happen. I will do this, and I will do this, and I will do this. That ought to make our ears prick up and pay attention, because what that does, what that ought to say to us, what stands out, tells us what God is like. He's telling us who he is. He's introducing himself to Abram and telling him what kind of God he is. Who is he? He's the God who makes nations. He makes nations. So he introduces himself as the one God who governs all political and military affairs of the world. God is the sovereign ruler of the world. Next, he's God who makes great. No one is great in and of themselves. They can't make themselves great like Babel. God is the one who makes people's names great by what he gives them and enables them to do. Everything that is honorable comes from God. So God here is showing Abram that he is a good God. He make great. He's a God who blesses people and has an ability to use them either to be a blessing or a curse. So what's that tell us? That God is a just God, that he administrates and exercises justice. And then lastly, he's a God who has this plan to bless all the families of the earth. The creation is his. He owns it and he cares for it. And he has a plan to ensure that something will come to pass that's actually good. It's a good plan, which shows that God is a loving God who loves the people he made. I mean, you kind of get what I'm getting at? See how God shines here in this passage? It's really not a story about Abram. It's a story about God. That's who it's really about. And here's the good news for us. Abram was quite literally lost. I mean, he's in a lost place, a lost family, lost in worship of false gods. He's socially lost because of his wife's barrenness. He's spiritually lost. He doesn't know God. And yet, God comes to him. God comes to him. And just as God came to Abram, so he can come to us. So he comes to us. Today, if you're lost and maybe you don't have a sense of home. Maybe your family is a mess. Maybe you don't feel like you have any real friends, or maybe you don't really know what to think about life, about truth, about religion. Know that there is a God. I'll tell you this morning about there is a God who loves lost people, loves the lost parts of you. The same God that came to Abram continues to come to us. He comes to us and he introduces himself to us and tells us the wonder of who he is and the promises that are found in following him. Today there's some whom I believe are here and God is calling you to really follow him. And you've been lost. He's calling you to leave your life behind, the life that you've been living. Calling you to trust him. Have him take you to the place that he'll show you. Will you follow him? Well, this section, it really concludes in verses 8 and 9 of chapter 12, and we see that Abram did respond to journey with God, and then he begins to call on the name of the Lord. So look at this in verses 8 and 9 of chapter 12. There he built an altar to the Lord, and he called upon the name of the Lord, and he journeyed on. God spoke, he called out to Abram, and in response, Abram begins this lifelong journey of calling on the name of the Lord. God becomes his God. Let's move on to our next point and see where this journey takes Abram next and what we learn about God through it. So next point, God sticks with us, sin and our lack of trust. Abram responds to God's call. He packs up his family, possessions, leaves his homeland. He's traveling, by foot, staying in tents. Don't know for how long it was after he left. I mean, it was something like 600 miles, so my guess is probably years, but until the next major event that the Bible records in his life. But it's not a very bright one. Not a very bright event. I mean, after he's just listened and obeyed God's word, and then he takes a big step backward in his walk with God. It doesn't make God very happy. So essentially what happens in the story is that Abram ends up pimping out his wife. That's his next step in following God. He and his family are hanging out near the Dead Sea. Famine strikes the land. There's no rain, results in no food. Figures we'll go down to Egypt. They got the Great Nile River, so they got water. There's a strong kingdom. Maybe there's food there for him and his family. He gets there, feels threatened, so he comes up with his stupid plan. He looks at his wife, Sarah, and says, "Man, you're hot, you're beautiful, so why don't we lie and give you into Pharaoh's house and have you for one of his many wives, probably part of his harem, where there's this group of women that he can just pick to have any of them to have sex with whenever he wants." Abram, knows they would never go for it if he knew it was his wife, so he lies, tells her to lie, saying that she's his sister. Just dumb. Some of you are newly married or about to get married, and this is just good advice. Like, don't ever tell your wife to lie and encourage her to have sex with other dudes. So, okay. Pharaoh goes for it. He takes Sarai in, and he ends up hooking Abraham up quite handsomely for it. Gives him, all kinds of stuff: sheep, oxen, donkeys, camels, servants, silver and gold. But God's not happy. God's not happy at all. Here's what God does. Verse 17 of chapter 12. The Lord afflicted Pharaoh and his household with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. Okay, two things that tells us. One, God has the power to inflict plagues. Okay. Two, God is taking a special interest in Abram and what's going on in his life. Notice it says, God does this because of Sarai, his wife. He inflicts the plagues on Pharaoh because of Sarai, his wife. Plagues were likely some sort of disease, since it says that something happened to Pharaoh and his house. Pharaoh doesn't know or worship God. I mean, right now on earth at the time, Abraham's seemingly the only person who even knows who God is. Pharaoh would have had several other gods he worshipped, like Ra, Amun, and Isis, just not Yahweh, the one true God. Anytime you see capital Lord in the Bible, that's God's special name for himself, Yahweh. The way ancient Egyptians conceived of life and of the world back then was that if there was anything good that ever happened, it's because the gods were happy. And if anything bad ever happened, it's because they somehow got upset. So they arranged their whole life and their whole society around trying to keep the gods happy, so that their crops would grow, so they would have, children, so that disease would, stay at bay. So when this disease plague strikes Pharaoh's body and his house, his immediate assumption is that some god, one of the gods, must be upset. We got to figure out, which one and who did it, right? So I'm sure he starts reflecting, is there any major event that's occurred lately? Probably sends some of his investigators to go and try and find out what's going on. Apparently he finds out that Sarai is actually Abram's wife. So he calls Abram into his palace and he just reams him. "What is this you have done? Why did you upset this God to unleash this on us. And he just is like, get out of here quick. Take your wife and go, and you can even take all the stuff I gave you. Abram walks out and leaves. And what happens next, I think, is rightly understood as repentance. The word repentance itself, it's actually a really simple word. It simply means turning around, going back. And if you look at what Abram does, he literally turns back and he goes back to the place where he first worshiped God, where he first started calling on God's name. Check it out. Verses 3 and 4 of Genesis 13. He journeyed on from the Negev as far as Bethel to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, to the place where he had made an altar at the first. And there Abram called upon the name of the Lord. He goes back to the place he started at first, where he first started calling on the name of the Lord. He turns back. All right. So we see Bethel, the place of worship, as bookends. On the front of this story and on the back of this story, with the whole ordeal with Egyptian Pharaoh. And it seems then that what this episode is really about is an account of an event early in Abe's walk with God where he didn't trust the Lord, where he didn't really call on the name of the Lord during that time. Instead, he tried to take matters into his own hands. He schemes and he lies and he mistreats his wife in order to make his life work out. Here's what Alexander McLaren, this old dead Reformed Baptist preacher from the 1800s, comments on when he looks at this story. He says, the less our energies are consumed in asserting ourselves and scrambling for our rights and cutting in before other people so as to get the best place for ourselves, the more we shall have to spare for better things. And the more we live in the future and leave God to order our ways, the more shall our souls be wrapped in perfect peace. You see, what Abe at that point had yet to learn was that God would order his ways. God would order his steps. He had yet to learn that God would fulfill his promise and that Abe didn't have to work to make it happen. So let's talk about us. You ever had times in your life where you've set out to follow God, but then you just sort of run out of steam? Your spiritual pursuit just drops off. Maybe some of you already, maybe you made a New Year's resolution. You're like, okay, I'm really going to follow God this year. And it's been a few weeks now, and that kind of energy and passion's already dissipated. Or maybe, have you ever had God really do something in your life where he really comes to you, has grace on you, he's really kind to you, you know it's him, but then just out of nowhere, right after that, you just really blow it. Like sin, bad sin. Or maybe you've ever been in a place where you're trying to obey God, you're trying to follow him, but stuff just keeps going wrong, and life just does not seem to be working out. So you start to try and take matters into your own hands and just try and force it to work. Ever been in any of those places? In any of those camps, then you're not far from the experience of Abram in this part of the story. And I think the best part of the story is what God does. I mean, we should expect God to completely reject Abram after he does this. I mean, it was utter kindness for him to go to screw up Abe in the first place. He makes this great promise to him. But what's the first thing that Abram does is he goes out and just gross sin. He lies, fails as a husband, sins against his wife and fellow man. Make no mistake, what Abram does here is serious. And it sounds like some people got really hurt and maybe even died because of it with these plagues. Where's God in the middle of it all? In the middle of this mess. He's right there, working. He's fully aware, intentionally acting to spare Abram and his wife Sarah and to save them out of this mess. God sees what is happening and intervenes. There's no mess that you'll ever face or could ever find yourself in. Maybe you're in a mess right now. There's nothing that's too messy for God that he can't save you out of. See, it shows us and tells us about the character of God, that he is a God who sticks with us. He is with us. God is not a God who abandons his people. He's not that kind of God. When he sets his love upon you, he does not change his mind about that. It's not like he's like for you and like you, and then he changes his mind and he's like, man, I kind of used to like you, but now I'm just not that into you anymore. Like, God is committed to seeing it through with us. Story of Abram here. It's a blessing and an encouragement to us. It tells us that God loves moon-worshiping pimps. Say if you find yourself in one of those places where you've just run out of spiritual steam, really blown it, you're just taking life into your own hands in any of those places, what you need to do is do what Abram did here. He went back. Just go back. Go back to the place of worship and trust and love of God. Go back to calling on his name. Dust yourself off. Get up and go back. Maybe you're hearing you need to go back. You need to return to the God that you once knew. Well, the good news is that God is a God who takes us back every time, no matter what. After this episode, it seems that Abram really learned that he could trust God because in the next major bout of his life, he leans on God's strength and his power, his provision, and he emerges as victorious. So let's get into our last point for today. God fights for us, victory in our responsive worship. In this final sequence of events in Abram's life before God makes this special covenant with him, which we're going to get into next week. This last section, it really almost serves as a mirror opposite to the previous story in how Abram handles himself and makes decisions. So basically his brother Lot and his family and they've been traipsing around with him. They're part of Abram's entourage. And God is blessing the whole group with more and more livestock, more servants with children, even though Abram hasn't been able to have any of his own. They get so big they can't really camp together anymore. They recognize that they need to split up. So now, if this were Abe from the last chapter when they faced this dilemma, what do you think he would have done? Probably would have seen Abram try and scheme to get the best plot of land with the best resources, the best situation. But Abe's grown to trust God. So he lets Lot pick. You pick whatever way you want, I'll go the other way. So Lot picks based on appearance. This plot near the Jordan River, and it's near the city for trade. And in response, after that, God basically goes to Abram and says, hey, you know what? Eventually, I'm going to give you all the land. It'll all be yours. What happens next is there's this war between this bunch of kings in that region. And Lot gets kind of caught in the middle of it, and he ends up getting taken away as prisoner. Everything he owns, stolen. Abram gets word of it, and he takes 318 of his trained servants, and he goes after these kings and their armies, and he defeats them and rescues his brother. And what you got to recognize is that this is a really big deal. We're not told how many people were in these armies, but you can guess it's likely in the thousands. And Abram goes and defeats them with 318 men. Now, that 318 number ought to stick out to you. I mean, it's kind of a weird number. It doesn't get rounded like, 300 or 320 men. I mean, 318. Like, it's precise. I think that's because it's meant to emphasize that there's no way that Abram should have been able to win this battle with 318 men. No way. I mean, yeah, sure, he exercises some good strategy and some good war tactics here, but it's a miraculous victory. And there's two other kings that actually recognize that and take note of it. Now, this is what I want to zero in on. It's this discussion that takes place after the battle with these two other kings. So these two other kings go out to meet Abram. One dude is named Melchizedek. He's the king of Salem, which later gets called Jerusalem. And the other king is the king of Sodom. And both of these kings are just shocked that he won. That Abram was able to do what he did. Melchizedek rightly recognizes that God must have done something, because otherwise there was no way that Abram could have won. Now look at what Melchizedek says. Genesis 14, verses 19 and 20. Blessed be Abram by God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. Now, Melchizedek's this kind of odd, mysterious figure in and of himself. And, people got a number of different ideas about him. Some people think he was an Old Testament appearance of Jesus, since the book of Hebrews makes this comparison between Melchizedek and Jesus. Some think he's totally fictional and just kind of added in later because, he's offering sacrifices, receiving tithes, and that's stuff that just came way later in Israel's history. Personally, I think Melchizedek, he just represents a dude that God was working in, even though he's sort of outside of the main storyline of the Bible and the main activity of God in the world. And you know what? It just so happens that almost just somewhat consistently throughout the Bible, there's these what seem like random people that really aren't a part of the main thing that God's doing, but then God does something in them. And I think it's a reminder for us that God can work in any person, in any place, no matter where you are or who you are. I think Melchizedek was a real person up to this point. He's probably a king and priest that perhaps worshipped many gods. All ancient religions, they operated with sacrifices and tithes, so that's really not that big of a deal. But what's really interesting is the interaction between Abe and Melchizedek, and the way that Melchizedek talks about God versus the way that Abram talks about God. So look at it with me. Melchizedek, he uses the general word for God, just God, G-O-D. Says he's the Most High God, which could imply that he worshipped multiple gods before this. But there's something about this situation, this event, that's really taken him aback. And so he says, whoever Abram's God is, he must be the Most High God over all these other gods. Now, look at what Abram says. If I'm right, it looks to me like Abram actually preaches to Melchizedek and the king of Sodom and tells him who the Most High God actually is. Look at it. So this is Abram in verses 22 and 23 of Genesis 14. I've lifted my hand, means taken an oath, to the Lord, God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, that I would not take a thread or a sandal strap or anything that is yours, lest you say, I've made Abram rich. Now, Abram uses the general word for God, but not just the general word. He uses the same language as Melchizedek, same phrase, God, Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, but then he specifies that this God is the Lord. This is the Lord, capital L-O-R-D, Yahweh, the one true God, who truly has power over all. So I think Abram here is teaching these kings about who the real God is, and I think Melchizedek gets it. He listens and becomes a worshiper of Yahweh from here on out, so that Hebrews 7:11 says there ends up being this priestly order of Melchizedek because of it. Now, that's a little bit beside the point, but here's the main thing. Because Abram defeated these kings, it benefited King Melchizedek and the king of Sodom and their people and their land, because Abram took out these armies that were wreaking havoc right in their territory. So Abram, by ancient standards, he would have been entitled to some type of reward of money and goods, but Abram refuses it. I want us to see the reason why. Abe says he doesn't want it because he lifted in the hand, he made an oath to God that he would not let them give him a dime, because he doesn't want anyone to be able to look in his life later when God fulfills his promise to him and say, oh, well, you just got a great name, became a great nation, or got rich because this battle happened with these kings one time and then you got really hooked up as a result of it. Abram is very concerned that God gets the credit and the glory. I mean, Abe is adamant about this. He wants to make sure that God gets the glory. Now, you see how different that is than the last event of his life? With the Egyptian Pharaoh, Abram schemed and he tried to make God's promises happen, and he ended up walking away with some riches. In this story, Abe didn't scheme at all. He relied on God. He won, and now he won't receive any riches because he wants God to get glory. Now, there's just two main things for us to get here. One, God's the one who really does the fighting. The victory is God's. And two, the proper response is worship, giving God the glory. The last verse I included in our text for today was verse 1 of chapter 15, which is, really kind of belongs to the next story. But it also, in a way, kind of serves as a summary of this event in Abe's life with this battle and the subsequent interaction with the two kings. Genesis 15:1, where God says, I am your shield, your reward shall be very great. It's like God's stamp of approval. Yes, you got it, Abram. I'll fight for you. I will be your shield. And yes, I will be your reward. You don't need the riches of men. I'll give that to you. I'm your God. Great story. What do you think it is meant to teach us? What are we supposed to get from it? Where does it direct our attention? I think it's pretty clear that God will fight for us. The real battles God will win for us. You see, the real battle was not the physical battle that Abe and his men had with these other kings and their soldiers. The real battle was in Abe's heart of whether or not he would trust God this time or not. God is a God who fights for his people. Do you trust him to do that? Or do you put all the pressure on yourself and try and make it happen? I love the second stanza in the old hymn, A Mighty Fortress is Our God. I'll quote it for you. It says, did we in our own strength confide? If so, our striving would be losing. We're not the right man on our side, the man of God's own choosing. Just ask who that may be. Christ Jesus, it is he. Lord Sabaoth, his name, from age to age the same. And he must win the battle. God must win the battle for us. And the result is worship, giving God the glory. Abe was adamant about God getting the glory. Are you? Is God your shield? Is he your reward? Is the goal of your life for people to look in at you and think that you're great or you've accomplished something great? Or is the goal of your life that people would look in at you and see the greatness of God? Is it about his glory or about yours? May God help us to trust him to fight for us, enable us to give him the glory. I want to pull the sermon together, wrap things up by seeing how all the stuff we've been talking about today is really about Jesus. And then we'll come to the table. Abram was lost in Ur, and God came to him. It's a picture of a time when God would come once again, not just to one man, but to all the peoples of the earth. It's a picture of a time when God came to earth in the man Jesus in order to rescue lost people. That's why Jesus, he himself said in Luke 19:10 that the reason he came was to seek and to save the lost. That's why Jesus came. You lost today? You can be found. In these days, it seems so much more popular to talk about seeking and searching, and far less common to hear people say, I've found. I have found. But isn't it to find what we actually really want? What we actually really need? We'll keep searching and searching and searching, and we're not able to find. So God came to us. He seeks us and finds us. He comes to us, and we're found. If they're lost, the answer is Jesus. In him we're found. Abram started on a journey with God, but he quickly failed and fell into sin and distrust of God. But God didn't abandon him. Instead, he stuck with Abe. When Jesus came to earth, the goal of his mission, what he came to do was to deal with people's lostness. And the way that he did that was to die on a cross. He paid the price for sin so we could be forgiven. And when he rose, he came to his own. And he said in Matthew 28, lo, I'm with you always, even to the end of the age. And then again in Hebrews 13:7 says he will never leave us. Hebrews 13:5, he will never leave us nor forsake us. Jesus sticks with us. Do you run out of spiritual steam? You just blown it lately? You taking your life in your own hands? Earlier I said that if you're in that place, what you need to do is just to get up and to go back. The truth is you're not able to do that. You can try to do that, but you won't be able to. We can't go back. We can't get up on our own. We can't call on God. So what God has done for us in Jesus is he's come to us to come get us and to bring us back, and he carries us, and then he calls us his own. Abe learned to trust God. He learned that God had to have the victory in his heart, winning the battle for him. And he learned that God must get the glory. See, the real battle is a battle against sin, and this is the battle that Jesus fought and won once and for all on the cross. In Colossians 2:14 and 15 says that Jesus stripped the enemy of all his power and authority and nailed it to the cross. Do you feel like you've been fighting and fighting and you're just losing and you can't seem to get ahead? Maybe there's some sin that you just cannot seem to get victory over. My advice for you is to give up. Stop fighting and have God fight for you. Jesus fought and won the battle on the cross. Believe that what he did is sufficient. Just abandon your own energies and your own efforts and make your life all about God, him getting the glory, and you'll be all right. I started out the sermon by explaining that the story of Abraham is a major turn in the book of Genesis that begins to focus on God's work of redemption, recreating a people for himself. And each point of Abraham's life, you kind of find yourself and you're reading through it, pulling for him, hoping he'll make it and he'll succeed and be the hero. But at every turn, it's God who emerges as the hero. And at each turn, we see a picture of Jesus. He's the hero. He's the hero the stories point to. See, Jesus, he's the true and better Abram. He doesn't come from from a land of sin, but he comes from heaven. Jesus is the true and better Abram who always loves and perfectly cares for his bride. The church, he lays his life down for her. Jesus is the true and better Abram who didn't just win a skirmish with a few kings, but he won the eternal battle against sin and Satan forevermore. And it's not just Abram. He's also the true and better Lot. He's the better brother who, instead of seeking his own interests, he gives his life away so that we might be adopted into his family and inherit his riches. He's the true and better Melchizedek. He's the true king and the true priest. The king who rules heaven and earth, and the priest who sacrifices himself for his people so they might be saved. See, everything's about Jesus. He's the great nation to be a part of. It's his name that it's great. It's in him that we find blessing. Jesus is the one. So let's go to him in prayer and worship as Abram went to the altar to worship. So we come to the altar each week to worship our God, the elements of the bread and wine, Jesus' body and blood. Remind us that Jesus came to us. He came to us to seek and save us who are lost. And Jesus emerges victorious. It's why we love him. It's why we worship him. And why we give our lives for his glory. So let's go to Jesus in prayer. Father, thank you for the story of Abram and how it teaches us and tells us that you are the God who loves lost people and that you are the one who has come to us ultimately in Jesus to save us. Thank you. You are a great God, you are a good God, and you are gracious. We pray these things in the name of Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.